In April 1991, an 11-year-old girl from Milwaukee was pulled out of her classroom by her counselor, taken to the counselor's office, and interrogated about her parents' potential drug use. Her counselor encouraged her to go talk to Sergeant James Gilway. The next day, Sergeant Gilway and 2 police officers pulled Crystal from class and interrogated her for hours over her parents' drug habits. Gilway told her if she didn't cooperate by snitching on her parents, that her and her parents would be in big trouble. Crystal asked if she told the police officer if her parents would be able to stay out of trouble, and he said yes. Gilway told her not to tell her parents about their meeting, because often parents beat their children after the children talk to the police. That afternoon, the police raided Crystal's home, arrested her parents, and took Crystal and her younger sister to a distant relative's house, in the process breaking her trust that she had made with Sergeant Gilway. This led to a civil suit that was found favorable to Crystal and her parents. The judge said the officer's coercive extraction of indicting information from an 11-year-old girl about her parents was shocking to the conscience and unworthy of constitutional protection. Crystal was a part of her school's DARE program, ensured to make sure that kids say no to drugs and trust authority figures in their lives. Today, I'm going to discuss the DARE program, and I'm going to discuss its use of inoculation theory to persuade. First, I'm going to discuss what inoculation theory is, then what the DARE program is. Then I'm going to analyze the DARE program using the inoculation theory. I'm going to discuss then if DARE was effective or not, and finally, the implications of the DARE program. To begin, let's discuss the inoculation theory. Inoculation theory is a model for building resistance to persuasive attempts by exposing people to arguments against their own beliefs and then giving them counter-arguments to refute attacks later on. There are 2 components of the theory: the threat, which is the forewarning of a possible attack against someone's attitudes or beliefs, and second, the refutable preemption, which is a forewarning about possible counterattacks later on. This theory is used very often in anti-drug campaigns because it's very easy to use. You introduce someone to the concept of not doing drugs or stopping drugs, and then you tell them all of these horrible things that will happen if they do drugs, and what people might say to them if they wanted to do drugs, and how all of that is bad, and all you have to do is just say no. Very simple, very easy. Next, I'm going to discuss the DARE program, but before that, I want to discuss the timeline on the war on drugs and why it's important to the DARE program. In 1970, the Controlled Substances Act was written into law by President Richard Nixon. This classified drugs into 5 different schedules and increased the legislation against drugs in the United States. In 1973, President Nixon declared a war on drugs. He increased the presence and funding of federal drug agencies and pushed measures such as mandatory sentencing for all drug offenses and no-knock warrants into place. And he created the Drug Enforcement Administration, or the DEA. In 1981, Nancy Reagan created the Just Say No campaign, alongside the creation of the DARE program in Los Angeles by Chief Daryl Gates. The DARE program was a drug education program aimed to stop drug use at a very early age. Then in 1994, near the end of the war on drugs, the Drug Policy Alliance was created by Ethan Nadelman. This was created and is still used today. It's one of the leading drug policy reform organizations, striving to make sure that the legislation on drugs is fair and is fair. The DARE program is an education program aimed to getting kids to say no to drugs. It's usually marketed between the ages of 6 and 12, between the grades of 6 and 12, but it can be as early as 3rd graders that are enrolled in the DARE program. I took the DARE program when I was in 4th and 5th grade. The DARE program has 2 goals: saying no to drugs and building self-esteem, because at the time in the 1980s when it was created, there was a link between low self-esteem and adolescent drug use. The old DARE program had 17 lessons, and the structure of it was that each lesson would be once a week by local police officers, And then the students, which lasted anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. After 17 weeks, you were able to graduate the program and get an award, and you were labeled a DARE graduate. The new program is a little different. They struck the 17 lesson structure and no longer focus on saying no to drugs, but rather students' behavior and their decisions. Now I want to analyze the DARE program using the inoculation theory and the rhetorical situations that we learned in class. The audience for the DARE program was obviously elementary to middle school age students. The purpose was to stop drug use at any cost, whether that be using students to snitch on family and friends or to get them to stop using drugs themselves. The medium was used oral presentations, workshops, lesson plans, things like that. And the context was obviously the war on drugs when it was created. The DARE program used ethos by having police officers and teachers teach students and develop a level of trust and authority amongst these students. It used pathos by playing on the sad effects of what happens when you use drugs and the consequences that may come for you or your family, then influencing kids to say no. The logos was that they used studies that were based in the 1980s that show how the earlier you inform someone about something, the more likely they are to be persuaded to your side, i.e. inoculation theory. Finally, the use of inoculation theory in the DARE program was wonderful. The DARE program is an excellent example of inoculation theory. It has a threat, drug abuse, and it uses these people, these authority figures, to persuade kids by telling them early on to say no to drugs. Then they use the refutable preemption by telling these students what will happen if they use drugs. People will die, people will get sick, you'll lose your teeth, whatever the counter effects are, whatever the counterattacks are, what people may say to get you to do drugs. So that way, when you're approached with the idea of possibly taking drugs in the future, you say no. Finally, let's discuss if the DARE program was effective. The answer is no. The DARE program was entirely ineffective. The effects of the DARE program are massive. The use of DARE snitches, which is a term coined by Max Felker-Cantor, says that officials would reinforce the message of saying no to drugs by having students snitch on family and friends, and encouraging it as an act of compassion and mercy for your family. You're doing the right thing by them, whether they know it or not. Students took this message and ran with it, reporting on anyone who offered them drugs, but also on family and friends who used drugs, even offered them something as small as a cough drop. The effects also include a distrust in authority figures. These police officers obviously were there to make arrests, not necessarily to support students. So in the end, when the students' parents, family, and friends were arrested, it increased their distrust in authority figures in general. And finally, it encouraged an interest in drugs and drug-related thoughts at a very, very early age, earlier than some kids may even have thought about drugs. The implications of this are large. In Crystal Grendel's interview with Max Felker-Cantor, she says, "It makes it hard for me to trust anybody. People I thought I could trust let me down." DARE failed these kids, and now they're grown up. According to a UCLA study, on average, an average of 22 adolescents died in the US each week in the year 2022 from drug overdoses, including fentanyl, counterfeit pills, and marijuana. These students were failed by the DARE program, providing them with trust issues and problems with trusting authority figures later on in life. There's hope though. The new DARE program has a better direction. In 2009, they scrapped the old 17-step plan and created the new Keeping It Real program. The entire focus of this program is on student behavior and critical thinking skills, encouraging them to have good decision-making skills in the future. It's not necessarily focused on just saying no to drugs. This is a much better direction and a much better use of inoculation theory than what they had previously. To conclude, we talked about the inoculation theory, a little bit about the DARE program and what it is, and then we analyzed the DARE program using the inoculation theory, showing how it was a great use of the theory. Then we discussed how ineffective DARE was and the side effects that it had on an entire generation of students. And finally, the implications of the DARE program by the students that it failed.